What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Muslim channel that claims to have 3 questions that atheists cannot answer. Let's see what he's got.
Atheism, a view that constantly leads you to a dead end while questioning the universe. While everything we see in the universe is actually evidence for accepting the Creator, atheism ignores them. We can talk about it very long, but today we will consider only 3 questions that atheists cannot answer.
Oh, really? 3 questions that we cannot answer. First off, I'm going to need a citation on where you're getting this whole idea that atheism doesn't deal with any of these questions, or atheism has no answers, or that atheism only ends in dead ends. I would love to hear where you got that from, because atheism is just a single answer to a single question, and that's whether or not somebody believes a God to exist. That doesn't go into the reasons why they believe these things, or what any one person, any one atheist claims to know about God. So yeah, given that atheism doesn't try to explain anything else other than what a person does or does not believe, then you're gonna hit these quote-unquote dead ends. Well, if you guys want to find out what his 3 questions are, then please stay tuned. Before we get into today's video, I want to give a really big shout out to all the Skeptic Mafia members, but especially the Globeheads and the Purefreethinkers. You guys were an integral part of making this year so great, and I haven't really made good on one of my promises, and that's to give you guys a shout out once a month. I can't go back through all of the months and give everybody a shout out for each month, but I will give a shout out for those members who have been here and who have supported the channel day in and day out. So for the Globeheads, thank you Gary White, Welder Smurth, Ulterior Motifs, Quentin Van Boeven, Chris Cowhig, the Clyde 950, Arduin, and Sean J. You guys are awesome. Thank you guys so much. And also, I have to give a really big shout out to the Purefreethinkers. That's our highest tier Skeptic Mafia members. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Wacko in Seattle, Speed of Sound of Gravity, Daniel M., The Gym Tanker, Infinite Consortium, Transient Skeptic, Cadence, Big Sky Pioneer 2, Jonathan Hanachek, and Who's Your Buddy? Thank you guys so much. I appreciate your support this year, and here's to another great year of GE in 2021. All right, so let's get into this guy's questions. Let's see what he's got for us today.
Question number 1. Where do these characteristics come from?
What in the fuck are you even talking about? What characteristics? I mean, I get it that these are questions and you're going to be explaining them, but I would hope that the questions would have a bit more substance behind them so that I could actually answer the question that you're asking without you needing to further explain it. But let's go on ahead and let's hear what you've got to explain about your question.
It's an established rule that one cannot give what one doesn't have to another one. For example, let's say there are only 100 white balls in a glass sphere. What is the chance of a red ball to be chosen from this sphere? Of course it's 0, right? No matter how long you wait, you will not get any, because there is no red ball inside the sphere anyway.
I mean, unless you throw a bunch of red paint in there, and then you can definitely pick out a red one. So yeah, if you add something new to the batch that turns them red, then you can definitely get a red ball out of there. You gotta learn to think outside the box there, man.
Keep this example in mind. Let's consider a black pencil. Can you draw a rainbow with this pencil? No, because the pencil is in no color other than black. So naturally, a rainbow cannot be drawn.
Well, no, you can still draw a rainbow. Rainbows can be drawn in black and white. I mean, you don't get the full effect of all the colors of the rainbow, true, but you can still have a black and white picture of the rainbow. So I don't understand why you saying that you can't draw a rainbow. Can you completely and fully draw a rainbow with a black pencil? No, you can't. Because it's only got a graphite, lead thing in there to draw with, but I mean, you could still draw a rainbow with it. I don't see your point.
What I mean is, you cannot give a feature you don't have to someone else. Now, I take a look at the universe and I see that everything is made of atoms. However, although atoms are ignorant, willless, lifeless, and blind, deaf and numb creatures having no cognitive senses, when they come together and occur to us as a human being, we see that the man made of them carries all these features.
Well, for one thing, you're totally misrepresenting atoms. Atoms are not creatures. They are chemicals in a sense. And so they would be governed by the principles of chemistry. These are very basic principles that we're talking about here. And when you're talking about different chemicals coming into different kinds of chemical mixtures and bonds and all that, you're going to get different properties. And what gives these atoms different properties are electrons. The number of electrons and what position they are in an atom gives the atom or the element the characteristics that it has. Now, when these chemicals react with each other, they end up producing different properties because they have a different configuration of electrons. They have different chemical bonds which give it different properties. So, for instance, a very high view of the whole human body thing that he's talking about here, we have different chemicals interacting with each other and forming other different chemicals, and they're all, coalescing into this human person, which gives it various attributes. Like all of the atoms that make up our central nervous system work together to make us feel things. And the various atoms that come together form an eye, which gives it the property of, the different properties that go into, being an eye. So the thing is that when these atoms interact chemically and they change in not only structure, but also in the amount, number, and position of electrons, it gives them different properties. So just like, for instance, sodium explodes when you put it in water. Chlorine is a very caustic gas that can kill you in its purest form. But when you combine both sodium and chlorine, you get table salt, which is used in just about every single food item that we have out there. Salt is even very important in our diet to help control and regulate blood pressure. So essentially what you have are these two elements with these different properties. But when you combine them together, you get a seasoning that's very important to our way of life. So your whole idea here that atoms are creatures that are ignorant, dumb, they can't speak or talk or anything like that. But then when you put them in the specific configuration of a person, you get all of these different properties that the original atoms don't have. This is because, essentially, of chemistry.
So, the basic question is, how can atoms give these properties to human beings while they lack all of them? As they cannot be the true sources, there must be someone else holding these attributes. Because the atom that cannot see cannot create the seeing eye. The atom that cannot hear cannot make the hearing ear. The atom without life cannot form the human who has life.
Well, for one thing, those things are not made out of one particular atom. Like, there's not one atom that makes those things. Those are billions and billions of atoms that come together and they chemically bond to each other and therefore change the properties that they have. Also, the eye is a very complex organ. There are many different things that go into, us being able to see. From the lens to the iris to the focusing of the light to even to the cones that exist in our eye that help us interpret the light that we see. All these things have different functions and they work together in order to produce an image. So it's not just one atom that comes together. It's not just one element. It is multiple elements that are coming together to work together, and they transform their attributes when they make these chemical bonds. So ultimately, the answer to your question here is chemistry and the laws of chemistry.
The human being has a variety of feelings while atoms don't have any.
I don't see why this matters at all. Atoms don't have to have feelings in order for us to have feelings. Our feelings are the result of higher brain functions. This would be multiple different chemicals interacting with each other in order to produce this effect. So it's not just one atom. These are whole molecules that are interacting with other whole molecules that are made up of multiple different atoms.
And all of these things are repeatedly happening every day, even every second. So isn't it necessary to accept that they are under the command of a creator who has attributes such as knowledge, will, power, life, sight, hearing, and compassion behind these atoms? As we said, one cannot give what one doesn't have to another one, so there must be a creator.
No, this is your classic God of the gaps argument, but he's also throwing in a composition or division fallacy in order to suggest that atoms need to have the different properties that human beings also have in order for human beings to have those properties. You're taking a small subset of a larger set and saying, hey, this is representative of everything in this, which would be the human body. And that's just not at all true. It's actually fallacious for you to use this kind of argument. God of the gaps arguments are never convincing whatsoever. Even if we didn't know what gives atoms their properties or why we as humans or other things in reality have the properties that they do, that does not necessarily mean that God did it, or that God is needed for it or responsible for it. Atoms do not need to have compassion, willpower, or anything like that in order for humans with higher functioning brains with complicated neurochemical processes that give them these properties in order for it to just come about naturally through the laws of chemistry. The individual atoms that make up all of the different neurochemicals that exist within our brains, they do not have to have the properties of a brain in order to interact in a way that would give the brain these properties. This is due to the laws of chemistry.
Second question, who is the judge, who is the prisoner?
Again, what in the fuck are you talking about? I have no idea what this question could be referencing. All of your questions seem to be very ambiguous and vague enough to where we need more information for you to spend 2 to 3 minutes explaining what you even mean by a question. At that point, is the question really useful? If you have to spend 2 to 3 minutes explaining what you mean by your question, I don't really find it all that useful.
If everyone is a soldier, a commander is required. If everyone is a prisoner, a judge is needed. It's a rule that you cannot be the judge and the prisoner at the same time.
That would be helpful if you could explain what in the fuck you mean by this at this point. I get that you're trying to go into the law of non-contradiction here, but I have no idea what this is even in reference to, so I guess let's continue?
What does this mean? You know that a room cannot be dark and light at the same time, or a paper cannot be dry or wet at the same time. These are some examples confirming that one cannot hold two opposite attributes at the same time, because carrying two attributes opposite to each other is a contradiction. Being a judge and being a prisoner are two opposite states. If you are one of them, it's impossible to be the other. Now, think of a building which is being built with bricks. If you do not accept the architect to build it, it will be a contradiction to accept that bricks are building this on their own. Because in this case, the bricks will be both prisoners and judges of each other at the same time. Since all the bricks have a nature that is the same with each other and have no knowledge and free will, they cannot form a building by coming together and agreeing. Otherwise, it will be a contradiction.
So, I feel like a new fallacy needs to be coined here, and that's the anthropomorphic fallacy. This would be when apologists talk about non-living things as if they are living things. So right here, he's talking about the bricks having the knowledge to create a building, and he's saying that, well, you need an architect and you need construction workers. Well, he didn't say construction workers. I'm putting the construction workers in there because the architect would design the building and then the construction workers would build the building. But let's get past that. So he's saying that the bricks can't build a building themselves. They have no knowledge of the building. They don't know where they're supposed to go, and they don't have any kind of means to put themselves in the correct position. presuppositions. I agree. They wouldn't because they're not living things. They don't have a mind or will of their own. I don't see what this has to do with your question of prisoners and judges, though. I feel like you're getting to God has to be the one to create and build everything because non-living things can't build themselves. But you're totally forgetting the laws of chemistry here, and I think that that's where you're going.
Who will give the order? Who will apply the order? A great confusion would show up. They wouldn't be able to establish a system that could stay protected from collapsing at once. So they are all prisoners, and there must be an architect who has an absolute power on them. The judge is the architect, and the bricks are his prisoners.
Yes, if we had different laws that we knew existed that would indicate why bricks would self-assemble into a building, then we would admit that bricks could self-assemble into a building. But this is basically houses can't build themselves, therefore evolution is debunked and God exists because God has to be the builder. This is just a dumb fuck argument.
Likewise, when we examine the human body, we infer that atoms cannot make this system. 350,000 people are born every day. Who is the commander here and who is the applier?
Wait a second. Atoms can't build this? Okay, so a little bit of nuance here. I agree. Atoms themselves cannot build anything because they're not sentient. They don't have any kind of willpower. They don't have any thought processes or anything like that. They just are physical things in this universe, right? I agree. Atoms by themselves don't use their own willpower and thought process to assemble different things in this universe because they're not sentient. You are anthropomorphizing atoms to make them seem like they're creatures and that they should have these properties of like people and other organisms when they don't. They are governed by the laws of chemistry just like we all are. But I find it quite hilarious how you say that the human body isn't made of atoms. At least that's what it seems to be like you're getting to. I mean, maybe you're not saying that. Maybe you're just saying that, well, atoms can't self-assemble into a human. And I mean, I would agree if you just threw a whole bunch of raw materials together, it wouldn't just self-assemble into a human being. There is a specific process and a specific set of chemical processes that have to go on in order for a human being to grow. And we already have a process that we know how it works. We know how human gestation works. We know the chemical processes that go into human gestation.
If we assume the atoms to be doing this job, which ones among them give orders and which ones follow the orders? How can atoms get along with each other and create so many people every day while they have no knowledge, free will, and life?
Well, the laws of chemistry. We are a result of the laws of chemistry being obeyed by atoms in general. Also, I would say that you're boiling down like the human body and complex chemical processes into just atoms is a real disingenuous way to look at it. Atoms obeying the laws of chemistry would assemble into more complex molecules. And as those more complex molecules continue to interact with themselves, eventually life would form, which would be abiogenesis. And then once life forms, and then it takes off and it spreads into the diversity of life that we have now, which is evolution. So ultimately, the answer to your question here is the laws of chemistry.
So, just as bricks cannot make the building, atoms cannot agree to carry out a quite complex job. That is to say, atoms are prisoners and their judge is God, Allah.
You see, this is like an argument from incredulity now, because you're just not understanding the laws of chemistry and how they govern atoms. You're not understanding how atoms get their properties or how the chemical bonds that atoms make with each other change those properties of those atoms.
Just as the same with the architect of the building, the architect of the human being continues to create and keep the human body standing all the time.
No, again, you're just using personal incredulity to assume that a God is needed for atoms to arrange in complex molecules and produce even more complex molecules as they continue to interact and then eventually get to the point where human beings exist. You're taking this small thing, atoms, and you're saying, well, it doesn't have any of these properties, therefore Humans shouldn't have these properties if we're just made of atoms. But what you're failing to understand here is that when these elements interact with each other, they change properties. And as these chemicals interact with each other, different processes take hold and they produce different things, which all ultimately lead into human beings having those properties.
Question number 3. What is the real reason? Imagine that we see a train and a baby is pulling this huge train with a rope in his hand. Nobody would believe this, so they would look for a hidden cause behind it, right? Because there are no attributes such as sufficient power, knowledge, and will in a baby. No doubt, another resource is required. In fact, we see gaps between causes and effects in the universe every day.
Citation fucking needed.
While the causes are so simple, the results are extremely complex. The emergence of huge trees from a tiny seed, the emergence of a magnificent peacock from a simple egg, the emergence of a complex human from some simple water show us some examples of the gap between causes and results.
Wait a second, I'm sorry. Did you just call sperm water? Also, you need an egg in order for the sperm to get inside that egg and start the whole process of growing a human person. I feel like this is very telling for a Muslim apologist to only focus on the sperm aspect and say that, oh, well, how can a human come from simple water? I don't think that you understand biology there, bud, because it's not just simple water. It's not like you throw water on somebody and then all of a sudden they start growing like babies off of their heads and shit. I'm not sure if it's just sort of like you don't know how like to translate what you want to say into English for your English video, but sperm is definitely not water. But also, another thing is that we know how these processes work. We know the chemical processes that go into trees growing, peacocks growing out of little chicks, and human gestation. We know these chemical processes. We know how cells divide through mitosis. So, I mean, you're trying to say that there's this big gap in our knowledge there, which you literally using the word gap here to describe a God of the gaps argument is fucking hilarious. But for you to suggest that there's this gap of knowledge here for how a tree can go from a seed to a giant redwood, we know how that happens. We already filled that gap in. So I don't know if you're just like lying at this point or if it's something else, but we know how those things happen.
So it's necessary to look for another source behind the view, because atoms lack the required attributes such as knowledge, free will, power, and life. So who holds these attributes?
Well, I mean, people will, but also atoms don't have to hold those attributes in order for people to have those attributes. And we don't have to look anywhere else. We don't have to look behind anywhere else because we know how those things happen. We know the processes that go into it. We know the complex chemical reactions that happen in order for a seed to turn into a giant redwood or for a peacock to grow up or for a human to grow up. We know these things. And it doesn't take a god, it just takes an understanding of chemistry.
Doesn't science explain this, you might ask? No, science only explains the detailed sequence of the stages of their emergence.
Okay, so this would make sense if we only knew the steps that were going into it and not why those steps are there. We understand the whys that place the steps in their particular order. We can fully explain to you why a seed turns into a tree. So no, again, this is just a giant fucking lie.
For example, they observe that there are some certain stages extending over 28 days inside the egg. Observing the stages doesn't mean that you solve the system and find the answer. Observing is just seeing sequences.
I mean, I would agree. We can observe them and see the sequences and we can see, those sequences happen, but we can also explain why those sequences happen. Now, I'm not a biologist, let alone the several different specific fields that I would need in order to explain all three of the things that you listed, being trees, peacocks, and humans. I don't have all those specialties, but what I do have is a very general understanding of the laws of chemistry. And through the laws of chemistry, you can understand all of the processes that happen, why each step happens in the order that it does, but also all the steps in the order in which they happen.
There are still questions in the mind. How can these atoms form a structure like a peacock despite lacking attributes such as knowledge, free will, power, and life?
Okay, those describe things of a higher functioning brain, which is the result of many different chemical processes happening and many different chemicals interacting with each other. At that point, it is not on an atomic level. You're trying to use an atomic level explanation for something that doesn't happen on an atomic level. This is so fucked up. You don't even know what in the fuck you're talking about. You're just saying, well, I don't know how this works, so obviously God had to do it. God of the gaps, personal incredulity, composition division. I mean, we've got fucking fallacies coming out of our ass here. I really got to work on that bingo app.
An explanation which is based on temporal sequence of events leaves out these questions with no answers. So, as we said in the beginning, that a baby cannot pull a train. Just like that, another cause appears to our minds behind the scenes due to the gaps between the so-called causes and their effects that we examine in the universe. So everything we see tells about Allah, those who want to find Him.
Wow, that's a really big jump. Going from, oh, we don't know how these things turn into these larger systems. So therefore, it's Allah, guys. Come on. It's obviously fucking Allah. Because it's goddamn ridiculous that atoms can turn into a human. I feel like this entire video could be boiled down into one thing, and that's atoms can't think or feel, therefore God had to give us thinks and feelings. Oh man. So, I don't know. These are three questions that are easily answerable, and the answer to every single one of them is the laws of chemistry. Like, just a basic knowledge of chemistry would indicate to him how wrong he is. Atoms have various different properties. These properties are determined by the electrons, their position, and how many electrons each atom has. Because you see, these electrons are key in forming bonds with other atoms. And as the atoms form more complex bonds and therefore turn into more complex molecules, and they start interacting with each other, they take on different properties. The example that I gave in the very beginning of this video was sodium and chlorine. Sodium explodes when you put it into water, and chlorine is a very harmful gas. But when you combine the two, you end up with salt, just general table salt that you'd put on your mashed potatoes. It's a very important thing, not only for seasoning, but also our bodies. So as you can see, simple chemical processes changes the properties of the atoms once they form these bonds. And this is a very high level general explanation of how atoms can assemble into a human so that we have knowledge, power, life, and all this other stuff. Thank you, heathens, for joining me today. I hope that you liked the video. If you did, please go down below and leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about this guy's video. Do you think that he had 3 solid questions, or do you think that they were too vague in order to really give him an answer other than just chemistry, motherfucker? Let me know down in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.